This was not the first time he'd gone missing, nor would it be his last. But this time he was seriously lost, and his young wife Charlotte would never stop pacing the cabin floor in dread he would not return home. He was a rugged-built man, brows that shaded his blue eyes, and a stalwart, even restrained demeanor. I remember him as being unusually quiet and thoughtful, and full of the cares of his business, said his granddaughter Elizabeth Cheatham. He was returning home by horse from spying out a new land for a host of families when he was lost for 14 days inside of millions of acres of mountains and wilderness, brooding with wild animals and Indians. He was near death when two unknown hunters found him ragged and starving. His son Felix wrote about the near-death experience. On his return from Watauga to North Carolina in 1770, having some business in Georgia, he determined to take his route back home through the mountains without a trace of a human foot to direct his course for the heads of the Yadkin. The weather set in raining, it was August, and in spite of all precautions, so wet was his powder that it was unfit for use. He wandered 14 days in the wilderness without ever seeing the sun among rocks and laurel and thickets, which at last became so impenetrable that he was compelled to desert his horse. As long as his strength would permit him, he would gain some summit and climb a tree to be enabled by his position to observe the ranges of the mountains, then descend and again pursue as direct a course as the precipices and thickets would permit. This he would repeat often every day. He at length fell from exhaustion of cutting the bushes with his knife to mark his course. He found that he'd frequently crossed his former track. Again and again he would prostrate himself on the ground, determined never to make an exertion to rise from it. But the idea of being lost where no traces of his death would be found, and his death being laid to the charge of Indians, he would slowly rise again, grope his way in the midnight darkness. In this dreary pilgrimage, he was often, for the moment, with the most ferocious contests between the male bears of the forest, which sometimes occurred almost at his feet. Yet he seemed doomed to starvation in the midst of plenty for the want of his ammunition and gun. At length he fell in with two hunters of the mountain, who with much difficulty he prevailed on to give him the use of one of their horses for him to ride to the first house. He said for the moment he saw them, it appeared to him that his life had been at stake. He could not have walked another mile. No mention was made of a compass, yet surely he never traveled again without one. Daniel Boone and he became friends and fellow frontiersmen. Together they would help develop the largest private land settlement in the nation's history. 20 million acres purchased from the Cherokee. Boone would help settle Kentucky and grow in fame. The other would settle Tennessee, and whose name is mostly forgotten, even though a few places were named after him. But for his grit and determination to stay and fight, the history of the United States would be different. Nashville would have failed, but surely settled at some different time. Andrew Jackson may not have come, and the whole area may have become Spanish territory. One man alone can be attributed to holding the fort and finding the way. James Robertson, frontiersman, soldier, statesman, entrepreneur. Father of 11, husband of one, native son.